And welcome to noise11.com. Phil Manning, to talk about new music, Phil. It's always exciting to talk to you about new music. Let's see, 1974, it was nearly 50 years ago when your first solo album came out. And here you are still going.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there by the grace of God goeth I, or whatever they say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I became a professional musician in 1966. So, later on this year, that's going to be 57 years of being a professional musician. It just seems staggering, really.
Well, I guess we heard the first taste of this album with Shut Down Town. That was a couple of years ago, right in the heart of the first of the lockdowns, I guess. Was that the song that kicked off this album?
I guess it really was. Actually, it was the first. It was the beginning of putting together a bunch of stuff, and that was the first one that I got into some sort of shape. And Vince Donato from Laneway Music, who's doing the online distribution of all my back catalogue and that sort of stuff, was pressing me to do some sort of a video to whack up, So I basically did that here. And then when it came to the album, it was pretty much the same version that went on the album. I think I might have tweaked a couple of things, or I certainly did a different mix for the album. But that really kicked it off.
And as you say, all instruments played by you. It's quite amazing that you can create an album like this. When you look at a lot of the pop stars of today, like using Justin Bieber as an example, 37 producers and 106 songwriting credits on his latest album. So, pop music today is basically a sausage factory, isn't it? It's a conveyor belt. But, you've gone the complete organic way where this can be done like this. And as you say, a real drummer in yourself, not a drum machine even.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the era that we all grew up in. People of my vintage, that was the way you did it. I mean, bands would go into a studio and they'd have a day to record a single and a B-side, that sort of thing. In fact, I've heard of some stories of people having 3 hours to record their hit single, and so that was very much it. You had to do it, and there's a lot to be said for it. I remember seeing a thing of Tommy Emmanuel just talking on TV recently, or on YouTube or something. And basically sort of saying, if I can't go into the studio and record something in 2 takes and get it right, then I'm not good enough, And that's all very well for him to say, but it's quite a truism that you should be able to capture that organic essence, that vibe, and I've always been of that sort of nature. Chain were always that type of band. Earlier albums that I did, albums like The Back Shed or Two Roads, Take Note, all those albums were done very organically. No drum machines, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that Chain history is just incredible, isn't it? And there will be dates coming up shortly for that. I think Blues Fest as well.
Yes, well, Chain are doing 3 shows in Melbourne in early March on the Labor Day long weekend. We're doing the Friday night at the Memo in St Kilda, wonderful venue. Then we're going down to Archie's Creek, which is a revamped caravan club, and that's on the Saturday night of the Labor Day long weekend. And then on the Monday afternoon, we're doing Way Out West at the Newport Bowls Club, and that's a fabulous, they're real dedicated blues followers out there. And so it's a great little run. And then a month later, we go up to Byron Bay for 2 shows, 2 days up there, and then fly back to Melbourne to do the Melbourne Blues Fest on the Sunday. So in March and April, Chain are quite busy.
It's a remarkable era of relationship between you and Matt Taylor, isn't it? I mean, you two have lasted longer than most marriages.
Yeah. Well, we've had our divorces every now and again, and well, we've had our ups and downs. But Matt and I started working together in 1967 in the Bay City Union. And as I said, it's been a bit on and off here and there. Yeah, originally, when we had Black and Blue, Matt was only in the band for 11 months. that particular lineup only went for 11 months. But of course, over the years, I don't know what it is, because we're sort of quite different musically in some ways, Matt and I, and yet the combination of the two of us seems to work. Just I don't know what it is. There's some sort of tension between us, a sort of a push-pull thing, and it seems to relate very well to people. So as long as we can both do it, we will.
Yeah. Well, some of those songs are credited to the whole band. Some are credited to just you. Black and Blue and Judgement are two that are.
We were a very socialist band, pure communism. No, back in those days, we tended to, even if I wrote a song, like for instance, well, any particular song, but say, I would turn up, say, with the guitar riff to Black and Blue, and it's sort of a. And Matt, oh, I love that. Let's make a work song out of that. And so he'd develop it, or maybe and there's the beginning riff of Judgement, and so having just a basic idea like that, and maybe a chord progression to go with it, then Matt would work on the lyrics. But then, of course, the bass player would start to add things, the drummer would start to think, things would change. So though the songs always ended up credited to everyone, in more recent years, it's tended to have worked out differently to that, because we live all over the country. Matt lives in Perth. The drummer now lives in Adelaide. Dirk, the bass player, is up in northern New South Wales, and I'm in Melbourne. So if we are to write new material, it tends to be one of, someone turns up with a pretty complete piece of music. Although Matt and I have done some stuff where I have an idea and put it down and send him a CD or a USB or something, and he might work on it from there. So there's and I mean, there's things like Zoom now. There's all these different online techniques. I mean, people do full-on recordings now around the world without leaving their homes.
You had Gertrude Street Blues all to yourself.
Yeah, well, that one I sort of wrote pretty much completely before it went to the band anyway. That was just one of those ones. But as I said, back in those days, particularly at the time when we all shared houses, and we'd go and live in Sydney to do residencies at the say at Caesar's place or something like that, and we'd just rent a big house and all live there. So pretty crazy days, but in that environment, everyone wrote together. More than individually.
It's incredible, isn't it, that Judgement and Black and Blue were both top 40 hits. The album Towards the Blues was a top 10 hit as well in its day.
Yeah, well, Chain was a funny band like that. We recorded the first album, Chain Live, the day after we broke up. Warren was going off to join the Aztecs. Glyn Mason was going off to England, which left the two Barrys and me. But we got together the day after our last gig and recorded a set, a whole pile of stuff, which became Chain Live. That ended up starting to move into the Melbourne, particularly in the Melbourne charts, because Chain was always very big in Melbourne. And there was no band to promote it. Another one we recorded, Gonna Miss You Babe, as a single. That started to move into the charts. While it was in the charts, we were doing a 6 weeks residency in some club on the Gold Coast when we should have been out touring to promote it. You know. So Chain was always this funny band that had minor hits everywhere, but we did have big ones with Black and Blue and Judgement. And of course, you mustn't forget that at the time we had those hits, Michael Gudinski was our manager. And Michael, obviously we were his first band he managed. And, he was younger than all of us, but he was already very savvy on how to get movement, get things happening. And so that was probably, I always put it down to if it hadn't been for Michael, I doubt that we would have had the hits that we had at that time, because he was just very clever.
Mm. You've worked with some incredible people over the years. You've mentioned Bay City Union. Glenn Wheatley was in that band, wasn't he, at one point?
That's right, yes.
You also worked with Jim Keys in Manning Keys' band. The Daddy Cool guys were in the Matt Taylor, Phil Manning band, Gary Young and Wayne Duncan.
Yeah, well, Gary, I first played with Gary and Wayne in the Laurie Allen Review, which was just prior to the first Chain forming. And then later on, we had a little trio called the Phil Manning Rock and Roll Trio with Gary and Wayne. And that was a great little band. We had some real fun, played sort of lots of Jerry Lee Lewis songs and Buddy Holly songs and things like that. It was quite a lot of fun.
Was any of that recorded?
Look, there's 4 tracks somewhere or another. I've got an idea that they may be up on Laneway Music as on the Spotify things. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I had a whole bunch of tapes that I just basically gave to Laneway Music and said, see what you can make out of this. and so some of them needed really working on, some of them didn't. But so as far as I know, I think there's 4 tracks out there somewhere in the cyber world.
Yeah. True or false, you were once in a band where there was a drummer who had the name Charlie Watts.
His name was John Watts, actually, but I think it was John Charles Watts, if I remember. Anyway, he was probably my best mate at school, and we formed our first band at school called Anonymous Incorporated. This is in Devonport. And so, yeah, we had a drummer named Charlie Watts for quite a while. And Charlie played around Hobart. He became a fisherman, and then he went on to become a master mariner, got his skipper's licenses and all that sort of stuff. He passed away a few years ago in England. But, he was a real fixture in the Hobart blues scene for many years down there.
Yeah. And another part of your ancient history, a band called Pilgrimage that got to tour with Pink Floyd and Elton John in England in 1971.
The band only went for a couple of months or so. It was outrageous, really. And we had some funny stories. Like we turned up to the Pink Floyd support, and they had their big, huge quadraphonic PA thing. This is at Festival Hall, and basically our roadie said, where do we plug in? And they said, you don't. You're not using our system. And so we had to haul in our little PA, which set up in the middle of the stage and played. That was funny. Like I said, we were only together for a short period of time, but we played all over the place. We played on the Elton John show, played on the Pink Floyd show. And the scariest one of all, I tell you, this is the scariest gig I've ever done in my life. Pig and I went across to Western Australia, where he's from. And we were over there for a couple of weeks, and he'd invite all his mates around, and they'd come around and have a few beers, and Pig would say, come on, let's play our set for them. So we'd play our set for them, or we'd play a bunch of songs. And this went on for day after day after day. So by the time we came back to Melbourne, we were really fit and really playing well. But the scariest thing was one of the guys said, listen, why don't you come down and do it? We'd like you to do a benefit gig for us. And we said, yeah, that'd be nice. What's it for? So it's for the Blind Society. And so we had to turn up and play to this hall full of blind people. And of course, when you're in that environment and you suddenly realize that no one can see you, they can only hear you, you suddenly sound shit house. It was so funny because we never ever thought about how we sounded. We just played and did our thing. And, you know, there'd be people there watching you and there'd be eye contact and do it. But put us in front of an audience that couldn't see us. It was one of the scariest gigs I've ever done. It was really frightening.
Well, you save a fortune on costumes anyway.
That's right, yeah.
Yes. Well, good to talk to you, Phil. The album Out of My Shed is there, and people can jump onto your website and get a copy of that, of course.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, well, we'll be seeing you a bit throughout 2023, of course, and then the art exhibition as well. So,
yeah.
you're a busy 75-year-old.